Before TikToks and FaceTimes, before emojis, ringtones, and missed calls, before even the ring of a telephone, there was silence. And then, a beep. This is the wild and accidental story of how we went from yelling across vast distances and sending smoke signals to talking across the globe. From 0 to 6 billion phones in less than 2 centuries. You might think you know the story, but trust me, this isn't what you learned in school. Let's rewind. Long before anyone thought of calling grandma across the country, the idea of sending anything through a wire was borderline science fiction. But that was only until something happened. And that something was Samuel Morse, a portrait painter that turned inventor with a mind buzzing with potential. After a tragic delay in receiving a message about his wife's death, Morse became obsessed with faster communication. And his solution? Electric pulses over wires. By 1837, he and his partner, Alfred Vail, had invented the telegraph. And with it, the infamous Morse code, a language of dots and dashes that could travel at the speed of electricity. Suddenly, news that once took a day's horse ride could now arrive in minutes. It was magic. But while the telegraph changed the world, it had just one flaw. It wasn't exactly human. There were no voices, no words, no laughter, just cold mechanical beeps. And that's where Alexander Graham Bell comes in. A man who unintentionally invented the telephone. It was 1876. Mr. Bell was working on a device to send multiple messages over the same wire at once. And fate, or maybe clumsiness, stepped in. He spilled acid on himself during an experiment and shouted, "Watson, come here. I want to see you." And to his surprise, Mr. Watson, who happened to be in the other room, heard Mr. Bell's voice, not just through air, but through the wire too. And with shock, they realized that for the first time ever, a voice had traveled electrically from one place to another. Not dots, not dashes, just a voice. And the telephone was born. However, this historical breakthrough wasn't exactly celebrated at the time. In the early days, telephones were seen as extravagant luxuries. Newspapers even mocked them, calling them useless toys. But what they didn't know was that the useless toy would eventually take over the world. And with time, businesses slowly started embracing Mr. Bell's invention when they realized that a quick call could replace a 2-day journey. By the early 1900s, switchboard operators manually connected calls across towns and sometimes across the country. It was slow and complicated, but it worked. And just like that, society began talking. The telephone moved from business offices into middle-class homes. They were heavy rotary-dialed beasts, often bolted to the wall, and usually shared by entire households via party lines. Yes, party lines. And not the fun kind. These were shared circuits that allowed your neighbor to pick up a call from his end and eavesdrop. Hadn't quite figured out the privacy part yet. But the cultural impact was massive. The world was shrinking, and the dial tone became the sound of modern life. Now that that's out of the way, here's where it gets really interesting. By the 1960s, two companies, Bell Labs and Motorola, were in a race. Not to make phones smaller, but to make them mobile. Nobody wants to move around with a giant rotary dial radio box, right? So, in 1973, Martin Cooper, a Motorola engineer, walked down a street in New York City with a 2.4-pound heavy phone and made what we now know as the world's first mobile phone call. And guess who he called? His rival at Bell Labs. "I'm calling you from a real cellular phone," he said, bragging. The phone had 30 minutes of battery life, took 10 hours to charge, was as thick as a brick. But it worked. And with this new invention, another page was ripped out of the book of science fiction. But that was just the beginning. In 1992, a British engineer sent the world's first text message, "Merry Christmas." And boom, people stopped calling and started texting. Phones got smaller, sleeker, and flippier with Motorola and Nokia at the wheel. And then, it all became a thing of fashion. Everyone had a custom ringtone. and Snake was the hottest mobile game on Earth. By the late 90s, mobile phones were everywhere. But something bigger was coming. You can't talk about phones without mentioning Steve Jobs. In 2007, standing on a stage in jeans and a black turtleneck, Mr. Jobs unveiled the iPhone. It wasn't just a phone. It was a revolution in your pocket. Suddenly, phones were cameras, GPS devices, web browsers, and more. And other companies followed. Sony, Samsung, HTC, BlackBerry. Rest in peace. We weren't just calling anymore. We were tweeting, filming, FaceTiming, scrolling, swiping, addicted. Phones had officially taken over our lives. As of today, over 6.9 billion people use mobile phones. Those are more phones on Earth than toilets. More people have access to the internet than clean drinking water. In some places, your entire identity, banking, education, communication is tied to your phone. They wake us up, guide us, entertain us, connect us, and they spy on us. We panic when we lose them. They are our whole world. But have we stopped to ask, how did this tiny screen become the most powerful object in human history? From Morse's beeps, to Bell's accidental breakthrough, to the war of mobile giants, to the pocket-sized supercomputers we now carry, the phone is more than a device. It's a timeline of human curiosity, ambition, and invention. It is quite obvious that the phone changed the world. So the next question is, what will change the phone?